majestic Churchill Falls in Labrador, where the force of the Churchill River will soon be harnessed.
In 1969, two power companies, one in Newfoundland and one in Quebec, signed an agreement for one of the largest engineering projects in Canadian history.
To provide low-cost power in large quantities to eastern Canada. Its potential, 6 million horsepower serving towns and factories.
Together, the two provinces turned Churchill Falls, a waterfall taller than Niagara, into an energy powerhouse.
Untapped wealth almost beyond dreams. The key to Newfoundland becoming a have province rather than a have-not.
This deal was locked in for 65 years. It was a huge deal for the young, broke province that was looking for a confidence boost in Confederation.
This is our land. This is our province. This is our river. This is our waterfall, and we will forever make sure that it will be developed for the benefit of the people of Newfoundland.
It was one of the worst deals in Canadian history. See, Newfoundland was poor, and Quebec, being their only neighbor, was happy to lowball them. That deal earned Hydro-Québec $26 billion and only $2 billion for Newfoundland and Labrador.
We were so full of the pursuit of coin that we, through Brinco, became involved in a power contract that we were to regret for 40 years. The swirling waters of the Churchill River were to become a gold mine not for Newfoundland, but for Quebec.
Because Quebec financed the project, they got to control the flow of power. Newfoundland had to sell to Quebec, and then Quebec could resell it elsewhere for way more money. This made Quebec tens of millions of dollars. And if that wasn't bad enough, the original contract included an automatic renewal in 2016 that lowered the sale price even more. All that to say, Newfoundland and Labrador got screwed. Poor Newfoundland. That crummy deal was set to expire in 2041. Then, last winter, something pretty crazy happened.
We are ripping up the 1969 contract. Not in 2041 when it expires, but today. After more than 50 years of a lopsided agreement that has been such a contentious point for Newfoundland and Labrador, we finally have a new deal on the table for Churchill Falls with Quebec. Today, everything changes for Newfoundland and Labrador.
The then Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey ripped up the deal in a pretty extravagant move with Quebec's François Legault sitting right there.
This is the 1969 contract, and we are endeavoring to rip it up.
Now they're pushing for a new deal, and that's what was on a lot of people's minds when they headed to the polls this week. There are billions of dollars on the line, and there is a long legacy of mistrust towards Quebec. What is being decided right now could redefine the balance of power in Eastern Canada for the next 50 years. So, can Newfoundland finally get a win? Or will they be bullied into submission again by Quebec? Russell Williams, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
And happy election day.
We're in the final stretch. It's been election palooza this year, and I have to tell you, I'm tired.
How does it feel on the ground there? Are people buzzing, or are people sick of the campaign? And
I think there's been a lot of elections this year, and engagement is a bit low at the moment in general. I would also say we've had very few polls in the provincial election. So people, I don't think, have a really strong sense of what's going on even in the provincial campaign. And it's been kind of a low energy campaign. I mean, the parties have had about a year to get ready for this, but it seems a little like it's not the most well planned out and energetic campaign I've seen in a while.
How has this deal played into the collective consciousness of people in the province? My impression is that it hangs pretty heavy.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not originally from here, and that's a good way to lead into this. I moved here 20 years ago from British Columbia, and this is one of the first things you have to learn about the local political culture here is the legacy of the Churchill Falls Agreement and that perception that Newfoundland and Labrador's natural resources have been used to the benefit of other communities, right? And there is a particular sort of target aimed at Quebec in particular. Fast forward to the events of last December when, you know, you get the Premier of Quebec in a large public gathering with the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. And the Premier of Quebec basically concedes that maybe the deal was a bit one-sided.
It's a win-win deal. Newfoundlanders will get a better price starting not in 2041, starting in 2025.
You know, we've never really heard that before. That's very validating for a lot of people in the province. And then we get that very showy moment where the then Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, Andrew Furey, actually rips up the old agreement and talks about how we're turning the page and we're going to have a bright and more cooperative future with Quebec going forward. I mean, this is a major sort of change in the way people need to perceive our relationship with Quebec and the relationship with Hydro-Québec. It really does feel like there's an attempt here to redress a really long-standing grievance in the province that is really central to Newfoundland and Labrador's politics.
And how does that animosity and sort of trust issues with Quebec manifest itself? Is it the everyday person that feels that way? Is it politicians? How does that show itself?
I wouldn't say it's the everyday person, but there is a sense in the province that we have been sort of dealt with badly in the past in our negotiations with Quebec. And, you know, some Quebec politicians can be a little bit provocative about this when they like to draw maps of Labrador moving the border and things like that. It gets in the local news here. It's like the two sort of communities are poking each other in a provocative way. But I think in general, what it amounts to here, most importantly, is a suspicion that we don't really know how to get the same kind of deals for ourselves that people do in other jurisdictions, and that Quebec, they're a slick operation. Hydro-Québec is this huge company. They have more influence in Ottawa. They have direct connections to Ottawa, and just a deep-seated suspicion that we were never going to get a fair shake on the development of our hydroelectric resources in Labrador.
Mm-hmm. So the renegotiation of this deal, it feels like the two provinces are sort of putting their history and their differences behind them and are willing to work together about this.
Yeah. So that's the way I think everyone would like it to feel. And, we're in an election, so we're in a kind of silly season to talk about those sorts of things. You know, thus far, it seems like people in Newfoundland and Labrador are broadly supportive of the idea of a new arrangement, and an arrangement that even provides significant benefits to Quebec. I mean, there's a lot of realization here that this is a really good deal for Quebec as well. But people are maybe somewhat prepared to turn the page. And we can see that in the politics a bit, in that it is not just the governing Liberal Party that's saying they will do this MOU. Even the Conservatives who have questions about the process are saying, we would also do something similar. We'll just, essentially their platform is, we'll do it better than the Liberals are doing it. To me, that's significant. That's like a sort of an elite political consensus in the province that a new deal with Quebec and a turning of the page is the way forward on this issue.
You mentioned the ripping up of the original deal. This iconic press conference when then Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey and Quebec's Premier François Legault, Furey ripped up this agreement in front of a camera. They're both like grinning from ear to ear. That seems like pretty significant symbolism.
It is, and interpreting that is interesting, right? So, as a political economist and an observer of that, I often wonder what that cost, right? Essentially, if you think about the dynamics of the negotiation going on, one of the things that our premier wanted was that moment, right? He wanted those optics, and so you do worry a little bit that maybe something else has been lost in the negotiation and the kind of harder bargaining you might want. Given the desire to sort of have that like culturally therapeutic moment, and I think it was a hard moment for the Premier of Quebec. I mean, he handled it really well.
Of course, first I want to greet my good friends, Premier Andrew Fury.
At the polls, I mean, I'm not sure this issue tracks that significantly in Quebec politics, but it is interesting that he sat there for it and he was willing to do it, right? It's not something some other premiers would do. So, my interpretation of that, and we're having a big debate about what's in this deal and who really benefits in the province, and it's complicated. But from the optics of that, I infer it's a pretty good deal for Quebec. And it seems like the sort of political elite in Newfoundland and Labrador feels it's a fairly good deal as well. And time will tell.
I fully understand why Newfoundland and Labrador would want this deal renegotiated, but considering it was such a good deal for Quebec and they're locked in for another 16 years, 2041, why would Quebec go back to the negotiating table considering they have such a strong stance here?
Basically, we're getting to a point in time where Quebec has to start making decisions about where it's going to source the replacement power if in 2040 that power becomes Newfoundland and Labrador's property, right?
Building new dams, you can talk about 10, 12, 15 years. So 2041, it's tomorrow.
So then you have to start thinking about the timelines of building new hydroelectric projects in Quebec. The capital costs of new projects are quite a bit higher. This is an already built project. This is some of the cheapest power in the world. And so the idea is there's a deal to be done there. If Quebec gives a little more money now, maybe they can secure that power forward into the future into 2075. And that's in their interest as well.
Because I assume that their power needs are going up as well.
Yeah, there's various things going on there. I mean, they could expand their own power generation as well. But Quebec makes a lot of money traditionally off exporting power as well. And that's, at least in our folklore in Newfoundland and Labrador, that's one of the grievances, right? That we sell power very cheaply to Quebec and then Quebec sells power much more expensively to other jurisdictions. It's much like pipeline politics in Western Canada. They're sort of in between our power and a market where we could get more money for it. But again, there's all sorts of different things going on here. Newfoundland and Labrador is in not great financial shape. We need the additional money. We need to figure out what we would even do with Churchill Falls in 2040 if we don't have a deal with Quebec. And Quebec needs to secure that access to power. So this is why I say there's always been a deal to be done here. But the thing that gets in the way is the history between the two provinces and the sort of cultural antipathy over the sense that we've been hard done by.
The terms of this new agreement are being put forward in a memorandum of understanding. It's referred to everywhere as the MOU. It's like this hanging MOU that I keep reading about. What is an MOU?
That's a good question. What is an MOU? The MOU is essentially an agreement to do a deal. But in this case, the MOU has a lot of specificity in it, right? It's really specific already about what that deal would look like. And so I think the way that I understand it and the way that the government wants us to understand it is that this is the framework of a deal, and we're just working out a few more details. And then at some point, this will move on to some sort of more binding contractual kind of agreement.
So just for my clarity, it's not a binding agreement. It's not a legally binding agreement, but the terms that are in the MOU will heavily inform whatever deal is eventually signed.
Yeah, I hate to use marriages as a metaphor, but it's like an engagement at this point.
Right. Oh, that actually makes it a lot clearer.
Yeah.
And there's some controversial elements to this MOU, I'm understanding. First of all, it's incredibly complex. I briefly looked at it and I knew I was talking to you, so I put it aside. But is it the fact that just no voter really understands it?
Yeah, so this is the classic problem with this kind of issue. Because of the history here and because of the sense that our governments have done these deals in the past, whether it's the original Churchill Falls deal, whether it's Muskrat Falls, that our governments haven't done a very good job of protecting the public's interests. Essentially, you know, all 500,000 people in Newfoundland and Labrador want to read the deal ourselves and sort of kick the tires. There's a reason why we're skeptical, but the deal is incredibly complicated. I mean, I have economist colleagues, I have colleagues who are experts on all of these topics that will tell you it's really complicated. And I mean, one of the major, just in the most simplest terms, the most complicated part of it is trying to figure out what a fair price is between the two provinces for that existing Churchill Falls power. That's a hard thing to do because there's no market to go and compare it to, right? We can't say, well, these other people over here are offering us this much, so that's a fair price. So that means it's a politically negotiated thing. And yeah, I'm sure if you're talking to other people, you're going to find people with very strong views about whether the deal is the worst deal ever or a continuation of the bad deal that we made in the past. And there are some elements in the deal that look like that. But, you know, the government's position on this is that, you know, when the premier originally sold it to us, he actually used the word trillion, that there was $250 billion in revenue in this, in his maybe over exuberant sales pitch. But
the sum total of this new agreement means not 1 billion or even 10 billion, but close to $250 billion to the provincial treasury over its lifespan.
You project things long enough in the future and you factor in a lot of inflation, numbers get really big. But essentially, voters are being sort of confronted with this. We're getting a bad deal. It's a great deal for Quebec versus it's the best thing ever and the streets will be paved in gold. And that's a little hard for voters to disentangle.
Totally. And obviously, the election is happening. Where do each of the parties stand on this MOU? I can imagine the Liberal government is in favor, but what about the Conservatives and the NDP?
So the Liberal government is obviously in favor. It's their package, and they very much saw this as their election issue, right? They've been in office for 10 years. Bringing out this MOU and the possibility of getting this deal was supposed to be the launch pad for them to win another election. Because the deal, at least initially, seemed very, very popular, the Conservative position on that as the official opposition and kind of the government in waiting was to sort of say, well, we like this, but we want more independent assessment. We don't really trust your ability to manage this deal as effectively as we would.
My watch as Premier, I will not rubber stamp a bad deal that sends the benefits of our resources to Quebec for another 50 years.
And so their message is a little more, I think, to the public, a little more confusing. They're sort of saying, yeah, we like it, but we're better at it than the Liberals. And we'll make sure you have more oversight. They've actually promised a referendum on it, which again highlights how important this is culturally, that a government thinks, you know, a contract to sell hydroelectric power warrants a referendum. The NDP's position, I think, has been a little ambiguous at times. I think they support the project broadly, again, because of the economic benefits and the financial difficulties the province finds itself in. But they also wanted some independent oversight. And as you're probably aware of, there's been a lot of controversy around that. It doesn't appear that we're going to get any sort of independent assessment as to whether the government is managing this process properly.
And there's also been some drama about people involved in panels and things like that. I know accountant Mike Wilson was one of 3 people on that panel, and he left because he felt that it was not transparent. I don't want to say corrupt, but that was almost the language he used. Can you just walk me through some of that controversy around the independent review?
So when the MOU was debated in the House of Assembly, and there was a special legislative debate, the parties sort of voted on whether they supported the idea of the MOU or not. And in order to get more support from the other parties, the Liberals agreed to this sort of I would call it a halfway independent oversight process where an existing officer of the House of Assembly would go out and find 3 independent people and they would take a bit of a look at it for the government. And that would be reported back to the House of Assembly. Essentially, at the first hurdle, that process kind of broke. Mike Wilson was one of the experts hired for that process. He's sort of a recognized expert on these topics. And although we didn't find this out until the end of the summer, he essentially quit almost at the start because, as he has said in local media this week, it was clear to him that the government was interfering in the process and the public was not going to get independent information. And of course, those revelations coming out just before an election and that controversy continuing to churn while we're in this campaign does sort of feed that argument that the opposition parties are making that the Liberals need to be scrutinized a little more, that the public needs more information about whether this is a good deal or not before we go forward. As someone who commented on this at the time, I'm a professor of public policy. I really like independent assessment. We had a mega project here, a whole different one that we haven't talked about, which is Muskrat Falls, that we lost a lot of money on because we didn't have a good independent assessment of whether that was a good investment at the time.
The Muskrat Falls Dam is an unprecedented fiasco. Construction has cost $13.4 billion, nearly double what was forecast. Just 280,000 electricity customers bear that monumental bill.
And in the public inquiries that this government conducted in response to that, we were supposed to always have independent assessment of these things going forward. Of course, we get to the first test of that idea and we're not doing it. And so, again, in sort of the public folklore of Newfoundland political culture, this is, we can't have nice things here.
There's calls from so many different people asking for this independent oversight, but the government seems like they are rushing to get this deal. They're ignoring the calls for an independent review. What is the rush here?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Is the rush just that the Liberals see this as a key election issue for them to get another majority government in the province? Or is the rush the concern that this deal may not always be on the table? And I don't think that the government has been really clear about what the rush is. I mean, you're obviously familiar somewhat with the political situation in Quebec. The Legault government is probably not headed to an electoral victory there. There is a legitimate concern here that this MOU will never turn into anything in practice because that government will no longer be there to complete this deal with us. And so perhaps there's a reason to rush for that. There is also the issue of the federal government sort of lurking in the background and this desire for, national infrastructure building projects. This is one of the projects. Perhaps if we do a deal now, some of the capital costs for some of the extra things in this deal, like the plan to build another dam at Gull Island, the federal government might come up with loan guarantees or something to make that a little more financially viable. I guess what I'm saying is it may be a case that the government feels they need to strike while the iron is hot here, but some of those factors weren't in place last December, and they seemed in a real rush even in December. I suspect much of the motivation is just political, right? There's a political win here. This could be really popular, and it's the kind of legacy project that premiers like to attach their names to.
I want to ask you a question about Quebec Hydro. Obviously, an immensely powerful organization. The clerk of the Privy Council for under Carney is the former Quebec Hydro CEO. That must be scary for a Newfoundlander.
So it does scare me a bit. Like if I think about who our team is that's in that room negotiating, and I think on the other side, at the time the MOU was negotiating, was someone who was a former deputy minister of finance in Ottawa and is now, really a point person, senior policy advisor to the prime minister. Again, that feeds into the fact that Hydro-Québec is a huge company. Quebec is a much bigger province. They're much more experienced in managing these kind of projects and understanding the economics of these sorts of things. And they have the political in, right? They're closer to the site of power. Maybe that's a bad thing. I mean, the one thing I would say is maybe that's a good thing. If the deal is a good deal that's in this province's interest, that tells us that the Prime Minister's offices may be there to lend support to some of the other aspects of the agreement. And it's a win-win for everyone, right? It is a project of national significance. It's two provinces that are trying to work together despite having a lot of reasons to not want to work together, trying to overcome that. And so I think, yeah, you can be scared of those things, but you can also think maybe that's of benefit here. Maybe that ensures that this project is at the top of the agenda nationally in a way that Newfoundland and Labrador can't often get our issues to the top of the agenda.
All right, so the Liberals are pushing ahead. The Conservatives and some other voices are saying, whoa, let's pump the brakes a little bit. But I wanted to pick up on that last part of my conversation with Russell Williams about the strength of Hydro-Québec, their savviness and their experience with these kinds of deals, and how that puts Newfoundland and Labrador at a big disadvantage. While looking into the Churchill Falls deal, I came across a pretty strange story. It has to do with Conservative Senator David Wells. He has been pretty outspoken and adamant about the need for an independent review and the need to kind of slow things down. And according to him, he's starting to get pushback from it and possibly some intimidation. So maybe just start off, if you could kind of explain to me why you joined the call for an independent review of the Churchill Falls deal.
A deal of this magnitude, especially because it reaches far into the future, should have an independent. It needs an independent review. We know that we all know, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians know the history of the 1969 deal, which reached into 2041. That deal is still going on because probably there was no independent review.
I saw you write and have been quoted that you think this is the same deal as 1969. Can you walk me through a little bit your thinking there?
That's a great question, because all I was doing was quoting the Hydro-Québec lead negotiator, a guy named Dave Rium, who said, at the end of the day, this is essentially the same as the 1969 deal. That alone, Sam, should raise a flag in every discussion about this. Because if this is the same deal and we're signing on for a long time and we're giving up 40%, that's when I go, well, hang on a second. I don't look. The river has been there since the end of the Ice Age. The river has been there, and it will be there, for far longer than any of our generations will be around. Sam, if this was the best deal that Newfoundland and Labrador could get, and the province of Quebec could get, we've got time. We've got time. They'll be there. We'll be here.
I read in your Substack and in a few other places your
and subscribe.
We'll put that in the show notes. I read that you feel like you're being silenced for asking inconvenient questions. Where is that silencing coming from?
So as I detailed in my Substack that came out just recently, like 5 days after I put out my voice, it wasn't so much against the deal. It was like, let's do a review, which would stand to reason would be a pause on the deal. I had outreach from Le Journal de Montréal, which is a Quebecor owned publication. They also own Le Journal du Québec. Of course, the head of Quebecor is the Péladeau family. And it was founded by Pierre-Carl Péladeau. And he's the former chair of Hydro-Québec. And when I looked at a couple of things, when I looked at the board of Hydro-Québec and what the board has been over the last number of years, and the board of Quebecor and Quebecor's various companies like Videotron and many others, there was a lot of crossover. And so I thought, okay, well, there's clearly a link here. And, Quebec is maybe not unlike many provinces where, where businesses have a degree of crossover. And then when I looked at the background of the journalist who requested my expenses, and this wasn't, just, hey, you traveled to Halifax, what was the reason? It was, what's your family situation? Where does your wife and child reside? Like these kind of things. Has your family situation changed? That's like quoted from the email. And I thought, well, and I get requests not all the time, but regularly over the years. I've been a senator for almost 13 years, so I get requests about my expenses. It's fully transparent. Everything is posted on the web. And so when I started getting questions about that, I thought, well, is there an underlying message? And I assumed it was, just because all those pieces linked together.
And so just to make it clear for myself and the listeners, the thing you're alluding to here is that a lot of these Quebec companies are working together to get this deal through whatever kind of propaganda means or pushing public opinion in any way. Is that kind of what you're saying?
You know what? That's a really good question, because there are two ways to do it. Obviously, scream out that this is a great deal, but if Hydro-Québec or the Quebec government does that during a Newfoundland and Labrador election campaign, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians will say, "Hey, why are they screaming so loudly during an election campaign?" So one way to do is to scream out loud. They can't really do that during a campaign. That would be inappropriate. It would be interference in our campaign. The other way to do it is to quell voices that may be against it. And I think my own suspicion is this was the motivation.
Interesting.
But of course, the first thing I did was pick up my keyboard and write about it, because I won't be silenced on this.
Totally. And I mean, I'm not a senator, I don't know, but that was an especially weird interview request, to be digging into kind of your personal life like that.
Correct.
Right.
I've never had that in the 13 years I've been there.
Yeah.
Ask about my expenses. That's public money, no problem. But ask where my wife and dependent child, where they reside. Has your family situation changed? Like, what is that?
Does that feel threatening to you?
I think it's supposed to,
right.
But it doesn't. I mean, I see it for what it is. I'm not new at this.
Well, Senator Wells, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Sam.
There's an election in Newfoundland, but there is a lot going on in the rest of the country. There is so much political news to keep up with. And today, to bring us up to speed, I'm talking to Noor. Have you heard of her?
Never.
Hi, Noor.
Hi, nice to meet
Noor,
you.
If I'm hosting the show and you're hosting the show, then who's driving this bus?
Hey, Ron, who's driving? Oh, it's okay. It's on cruise control. Hey, Ron, cruise control just regulates speed. It doesn't steer. Come again? No!
What have you got for me?
Sam, do you remember when Liberal Minister Gary Anand-Desangri announced the Strong Borders Bill?
Yeah, I remember that. It was a huge omnibus bill.
This morning, I introduced Bill C-2, the Strong Borders Act.
There were a bunch of other things that were jammed into this bill, but the big one that people freaked out over was that the bill would make it easier for police to access Canadians' internet data without a warrant. It's called the lawful access provision, which basically says that law enforcement could demand your subscription or transmission data from any online provider in Canada, no judge needed. And an online provider could mean anything. It could be your telecoms data, your dating apps data, your therapist's web portals data. It could be anything.
Not the dating apps.
Not the dating apps. Yes, the dating apps.
Okay, I got a question though. What about all the thirst traps I have saved in my drafts for Instagram?
Yeah, they could access the thirst traps. Civil liberties experts called this lawful access provision extremely dangerous and broad.
It's just a blank check of these new powers.
And they said that companies wouldn't have much power to fight this provision in court. But plot twist.
Well, the Liberals tabled a new version of their border bill today after the last one faced a slew of criticism over privacy concerns and giving police too much power.
I was pleased to introduce this afternoon Bill C-12, the Strengthening Canada's Immigration System and Borders Act. It has many elements of Bill C-2.
This new bill is now called Bill C-12, which drops the controversial lawful access parts for now. It includes everything else but that provision. And Liberal Minister Gary Anand-Desangri says that he still wants those powers, along with other parts of that bill that raised other privacy concerns, but he just wants to deal with them separately.
I need to make a pun here. Hold on. Okay, I'll see to it that they split it, but why are they doing that?
I love that. That's a good one.
Oh my God. Why now? Why are they doing it now?
Gary Anand-Desangri wants to deal with them separately because he thinks he'll get more support for the pieces on immigration and fentanyl. It's super interesting that the lawful access provision is going to exist in some form or another. Just for context, Canadian police chiefs have pushed for this measure. Anand-Desangri says it's important to fight online predators, to fight child pornographers and sexploitation offenders, and says that Canada is basically the only Five Eyes member without the power to do that.
Okay, so Ottawa took something really controversial. They split it in half, added 10 to the bill, turned it from 2 to 12, and then hoped people wouldn't notice, I guess, and they're still going to try and do it anyways, just further down the line.
You're on the money, except we're noticing.
Okay, what else do you got for me? What else is going on?
Let's stay on this theme of borders for just another second. U.S. Congress is floating a new idea.
Oh my God. Do we have to talk? Do we have to do this?
We have to do this, Sam.
All
U.S.
right.
Congress
What is U.S.
floating.
Congress floating?
They're floating whether to let American law enforcement officers operate on Canadian soil.
What?
Yes.
Like NYPD just walking into Canada? Just like I know in airports everywhere? What is the deal here?
Yes. Cops, U.S. cops, they're floating whether to let U.S. cops basically operate on Canadian soil. We already have some, police enforcement work, some U.S. police enforcement work here at like pre-clearance zones in airports, but this is a huge step further. This new bill, House Resolution 5518, comes from a New York Republican. It calls on Homeland Security to negotiate cross-border policing agreements with Canada. It would allow U.S. officers to operate here and Canadian officers to operate there. It doesn't say whether, they could operate alone in Canada or vice versa.
It's very ominous. What if a U.S. officer arrests someone here? Do they follow our laws? Do they follow American laws? Whose laws are responsible for this?
Fantastic question, Sam, that I don't actually have an answer for. No one really knows. The text of the bill is super unclear, and to make matters just even less transparent, the public safety minister, Gary Anand-Desangri, his office is not commenting on the matter.
Gary, man. Gary. What are you doing? Let us know.
All of this news comes just days after FBI Director Kash Patel claimed that there has been a sharp increase in suspected terrorists coming into the United States from Canada. Here's what he had to say about the matter.
There has been a sharp increase of known or suspected terrorists entering through our northern border. And so what I'm trying to do is work with our northern border states and our interagency to tackle that problem.
Everybody's favorite podcaster turned FBI Director Kash Patel.
It's just really interesting that he brought this up because just a few days ago, Donald Trump met with Prime Minister Mark Carney, and he actually praised the progress being made on border policing.
Canada's worked hard, and they've done a much better job than in the past. We have very few people coming in through our southern border, too. We've worked with Canada, and we've worked with Mexico, so we've made it a lot better.
What the heck?
So many mixed signals. But yeah, not a lot of clarity on this bill.
Is there anything that you have for me that doesn't involve Gary and Anna-Sangri?
Yes, but it involves Michelle Rempel-Garner. So
No.
the Conservatives want to restrict birthright citizenship in Canada.
What's happening is that most temporary residents effectively stay here indefinitely. Fairness must be restored. Will the minister update our outdated laws and require at least one parent to be a citizen or permanent resident to qualify for automatic citizenship?
Is that Michelle Rempel-Garner, known for her appearance on Canada Land Politics Tuesday edition?
That's exactly what she's known for. Not known for being the conservative immigration critic, just known for being a guest on the show.
The problem is, for the first time in Canadian history, we have over 3 million temporary residents in the country, and the Liberals are still issuing record level of more temporary resident permits. So now you combine that with the Liberals' broken humanitarian claim system, a protracted appeal system, and their reluctance to deport.
So she wants kids born in Canada to not be Canadian.
Yes, kind of. She says that automatic citizenship to newborn children should only apply to those who have at least one parent who's either a citizen or permanent resident. So if you're here and your partner's here on a temporary permit or as a visitor, your child would not, and you gave birth here in Canada, your child was born in Canada, they would not be Canadian. They would be whatever your nationality is. But if you're a permanent resident or a citizen, then yeah, your kid's Canadian.
Okay.
She says that it's a measure that would mirror rules in other countries, other peer countries.
Is that true?
It is, actually. The United Kingdom, Germany, Australia, a lot of countries, at least I know this from experience, but a lot of countries in the Middle East all require at least one parent to be a permanent resident or citizenship to pass down. Like, this is very much an American and Canadian thing. And Americans are now having conversations to roll that back. And it's very interesting to see that kind of conversation pop up here in Canada as well.
That is really interesting. But Rempel-Garner has been hounding the Liberals for the past couple of weeks, actually longer than that, on the immigration file with proposal after proposal after proposal. First, it was the proposal to abolish the temporary foreign worker program. Now it's this. So it seems like the Conservatives are pushing hard, very hard, on the immigration file.
Yeah, she's even got Pierre Poilievre singing this tune, too.
Now, on birthright citizenship, we've got, because of Mark Carney's former immigration minister, Sean Fraser, we have roughly, 3 million temporary residents here in Canada. And the risk is that some might think that the only way to stay is by having a kid here.
Sounds like the same tune he's been singing for a very long time. So we will keep our eye on this. Thank you, Noor, for filling me in. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine.
All right, that is it for this episode of Canada Land Politics. We did reach out to Québecor and Journal de Montréal for comment on Senator Wells' accusations, but they did not respond in time for publication. Thanks so much again for joining me, and remember to hit the little bell, hit subscribe, and hit like. And you know what? While you're doing it, you can share it with your friends too. See ya.